friends, I'm Sarah. Welcome back to my channel, Sunset Bow Tarot. So today I wanted to do a slightly belated VR to the Only 10 Indie Decks tag. I had already done a VR to the Only 10 Mass Market Decks tag, so I figured just to kind of round out that little mini series, I should do both of them. And so this, again, the idea of this tag is pretty self-explanatory. If you could only have 10 indie decks, which are the 10 that you would pick? And that's what I'm gonna go through. I cannot even convey how difficult this was to pick 10, and this literally could change tomorrow. I mean, like, as I was picking some, I was heartbroken to not be picking other ones. It was incredibly difficult, but for today, here's what I would say. And before I get started with this, I should just note that, again, this is 10 indie decks, the ones that I truly couldn't live without. As a result of that, I will be talking about decks in this video that are out of print or were expensive when they were in print, and you know, that's just the reality of the situation in order to do this tag. So, you know, if that's something that is not content that you're interested in, you know, feel free to skip this one if you're not interested in seeing things like out of print decks. So the first indie deck that I would include in my Only 10 indie decks is the Textured Tarot. This is a deck that I could not imagine being without. I absolutely love this deck. I love the imagery of it, despite hating the cardstock and finding it incredibly difficult to work with, which I think should tell you something about exactly how much I genuinely enjoy working with this deck and how much I get out of it when I do work with it. This is a deck that I use, the vast majority of the time I use this deck to read for other people. And the reason is, so Thea from Garden Goddess Tarot made a really good video just a short while ago where she basically was giving her tips for reading the tarot. And one of her tips was trust your deck. Like, you have to trust that the deck is telling you what you need to know. You know, you have to have trust in the messages that you're getting from the deck. And my level of trust in this deck is so high because it always gives me more than what I ask for. And I don't know how that's possible. I don't know why that's true, but there's just something about maybe the layered nature of the artwork. So many messages come at me out of this deck, and I've had so many experiences, like I said, especially for reading with other people, where this deck gives me even more information than what even necessarily the question was about. Like, there was one time in particular with this deck where I was reading for somebody and she had a question about her professional life. And while I was shuffling, I got jumpers. And when I get them a lot with this deck because it's so hard to shuffle. And when I get jumpers, typically, because I'm usually doing a spread, when I get jumpers, I typically like lay them aside and turn them over after I'm done with the whole rest of the reading just to see what they say or add to the rest of the reading. And so I gave her this whole reading about her professional life, and then I turned over the 3 jumpers, and they were basically a 3-card mini reading about her marriage, which actually turned out was at the root of some of the professional problems that she was talking about. And it was just one of those things where it was like so amazing, where I was just like, okay, like, this is giving me a whole new perspective on, like, everything I just told you is still true, but this is giving me a whole new perspective on what the root cause of that might be. You know, like, that's the kind of experience that I have with this deck, like, really frequently when I read with it. And so I just, ooh, I have a upside down Page of Cups. So I just, you know, like, I trust it implicitly. Like, I always get good information from it. And so that is the reason why I love it so much. And I will put up with this shitty cardstock forever because I just cannot fathom not having this deck available to me, especially for use when reading for other people. So the next deck on my list of Only 10 indie decks is the Majestic Earth Tarot. I absolutely love this deck. This is a really important deck to me. Weirdly enough, if you guys watch my channel, you know that I normally really despise keywords, but I actually don't mind the keywords on this deck because the artwork is so immersive and the keywords are so tiny that I don't even like notice them. I don't know what even half of them say because I never look at them when I read with this deck. But this deck is really important to me. I've talked a lot about how I really like decks with a strong sense of place, and I really like decks that bring you into a place via their artwork, and this deck does that incredibly. And I find that because of that, like, this is a really powerful deck. Like, I always get sort of like big energy type of readings from this, and I don't know if that's just because like the artwork is so vast and spacious and it like makes you feel kind of small, but I don't generally pull this deck out for like mundane questions. This is always one of those like big life direction kind of questions decks. Like, that's what it feels right for me. And so it is incredibly important to me, but some of my most impactful readings that I have ever done for myself have been with this one. And also, I think as a result of that, I like never use this deck to read for other people. I did it once. I was on a Zoom call with some friends and they wanted to do some tarot readings, and this deck just happened to be like the closest one within reach. So I grabbed for it, and like the reading sucked and it was awful and I hated it. Like I hated reading for other people with this deck. I didn't like it. So I really just keep this one for myself, and like I said, it's always like big energy, like big major like potent messages coming out of this one, I feel like. So yeah, this is just a really special one and I love it with all my heart. So again, that is the Majestic Earth Tarot. So next up on my list of only 10 indie decks is the Bohemian Gothic Tarot by Baba Studio. I absolutely love this one. This one is actually coming up for a pre-order for a new edition, I believe. So that is pretty exciting. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to go for the new edition yet, but I really love this deck. And this deck I feel like is on my list of 10 because it fills a really important niche in my collection. I don't generally tend to gravitate towards things with sort of a dark or spooky aesthetic. Like, that's just not my typical aesthetic, and so you won't find a lot of like darker decks or vampire decks or like all those kinds of things. You don't really find those necessarily in my collection. But there are those times of year where I do really want a deck with some of those energies to read with, just because it's fun. And, you know, around Halloween and stuff like that, that's when I reach for this deck, because it kind of is one of the only ones that really has a little bit of that darker aesthetic while still being funny to me. Like, this deck feels cheeky to me. There's a lot of like tongue-in-cheekness to it. It feels kind of campy. I love that it has this sort of like late Victorian, early Edwardian aesthetic. I thoroughly enjoy this deck. Like, I just find it very very fun and very entertaining, and at that time of year when I really want a deck that has a little bit of this sort of more spooky energy, this is the one that I always reach for. And you know, I love this guy. I love this Seven of Wands guy. He just looks so irritated that nobody is leaving him alone. Like, I don't know, it's just honestly funny to me in a lot of cases. So I really adore this deck. It's a great one, and it really kind of sits squarely in a very small niche in my collection where I like only kind of need to have one thing, you know. So again, that is the Bohemian Gothic. So next up, and just to go in completely the opposite direction, this is one of my favorite sort of summer vibes decks, and this is the Dame Darcy Mermaid Tarot. So this deck is fantastic. It's a really heavily themed deck, but for some reason it reads really well on any topic. Like, the theme doesn't take away from the sort of neutrality or readability of this deck in any way. Like, it still feels like it just speaks super comfortably on basically any topic that exists. And I love the artwork of it. I love that it's just this sort of like loose comic booky kind of style. It's a little anarchic feeling. There's a lot of like campiness to it. It's a very queer deck in certain ways. In addition to mermaids, there's lots of like pirates and sailors, and it's a really, really fun deck to read with. And honestly, I would reach for this deck for just about any kind of reading. Even though it does have this like fun, campy energy to it, it really works across the board for just about anything. So I really, really enjoy this deck, and it is one that I tend to reach for in the summer because it just gives me those you know, beachy vibes that feel really good in the summer. And yeah, I really, really love this one. So again, that is the Dame Darcy Mermaid Tarot. So next up is another deck where I really love the deck, even though I really hate the cardstock, and I put up with the cardstock because I love the imagery so much. This is the Efflorescent Tarot. This is super, super out of print, but I absolutely adore this deck. There's just something about this artwork. It's really, really detailed. Like, she does these incredibly detailed pen and ink drawings. This is the color version of the deck. There's also a black and white version, which I also actually have. In all honesty, I'm probably at the point where I reach for the color version more, but I love both of them. I would have a really hard time letting either of them go. So this deck is just really beautiful. I love that it has sort of a sense of melancholy in all the artwork. The people are all kind of weird looking. They have these really, really long, weird fingers, and I just love the detail in it. You know, something about this feels very sort of Edward Gorey-esque in a way to the artwork, and I love that vibe. I love this deck. I've done some really, really potent, important readings with this deck. There were a couple of years where I actually used this deck to do my year ahead reading. Like, it's a very important deck to me, and I really love it. So anyway, yeah, that is, again, the Efflorescent Tarot. I can't fathom a situation in which I would be able to give this one up. So really, really love it. So next up is another deck that is probably not a surprise to see on this list. I've talked about this deck a lot on my channel. This is the Tyldwick Tarot. I really, really love this deck. It's an incredibly special one. This is actually the second edition of the deck. It has the pretty bronze colored edging on it. I actually have both the first and second editions of this deck. I mostly use nowadays the second edition, but I love the first edition too, and it's important to me. Like, I really kind of cherish that deck. So anyway, this deck is just amazing. Again, like I said before, I really love decks that have a strong sense of place and that really bring you into a place when you're working with them. And this deck does that in spades. And plus, I really love things like touring old houses. You know, like, I really love the feeling that you get of being in a place where people have lived and thinking about what their lives were like, and just that, I don't know, it's really hard to describe, but that sort of presence that you feel when you're in a place where people have lived, and so this really kind of gives me that feeling in deck form, and it's one of my favorite feelings. It's a feeling that I feel very sort of possessive about, so I don't ever use this deck to read for other people, like, ever, because again, it's that feeling of being alone in this place that is what really kind of brings the potency to me of the readings that I do with this. It's just really special. There's no other deck like it, and yeah, I could never imagine being without this one. I just adore it. So anyway, again, this is the Tyldwick Tarot. I will say that I believe they are doing right now pre-orders for another print run of this deck. They're doing a third edition. I believe that's going to be like really special. Like, I think it has a slightly different box. I think it even comes with like a booklet and stuff, which this deck has never come with before, which again, one of the things that I like about this deck is that it didn't come with a booklet. Like, you really had to put yourself in the place and like look at all of the little clues in the artwork and really think about what they all represented to make sense of this deck. So I actually liked the puzzle of this deck, and so I don't really have a strong desire to have a guidebook for this one, which is not typical for me. Typically, if there was a guidebook, I would want it, but in this case, I've always loved the puzzle of this one. I've always loved that feeling of, you know, there being something that I needed to figure out in order to use it, that there were clues coming from my surroundings that I needed to take in, and it was almost like detective work using this one, you know, so I really love that about it, and so I don't see myself getting the third edition, but anyway, this is another really incredible deck that, like I said, is out of print right now, but they are doing pre-orders, so so that is very exciting. So next up is a deck that I feel like is notorious in my collection for being the deck that I've, no lie, purchased 4 times. On 4 separate occasions, I've purchased this deck. So this is, of course, the Sasuraibito Tarot. And this is a deck where, when I first got this deck, I couldn't connect to it. I got it and I wasn't feeling any kind of connection. So I went ahead and I passed it along. And then maybe about a year later, a little over a year later, I was really going through a tough time, and I saw this deck again on somebody's channel and just felt a connection to it, like felt a draw to it. And so I purchased the deck again, and then at that point, we really bonded, because it was just a really difficult sort of personal time that I was going through professionally, you know, in terms of family. Like, a lot of stuff was going on, and this deck was just really supportive, like straightforward but supportive, and it felt really empowering and really just like a booster to me during that tough time. And so yeah, this is a really special one. And so, you know, I had that second copy of it that I got, and then the creator came out with it on matte cardstock. So I bought the matte version and let go of my glossy version, because I always prefer matte when I can get matte. And then she came out with a mini version, the Tiny Traveler edition of this deck, and I got the mini version. So I now own 2 copies of this deck, the matte large size edition and the Tiny Traveler edition. But like, yeah, literally I bought this Sasuraibito 4 times. But I absolutely love this deck. I felt very bonded to it ever since it kind of came to me in that tough time. And as a result of that, it is a deck that I really turn to when I need honesty in a supportive way. So yeah, I really love this deck. So next up on my list of 10 indie decks is the Spacious Tarot. So this is another deck to put on that list of decks that I love that have a really strong sense of place. I really love this deck for its slightly minimalistic nature. There are almost no references to humans in this deck. Like, only on the death card there are some skeletal human hands. Aside from that, there are no people in this deck at all. There are some animals, but even animals aren't like frequent throughout the deck. It's very minimal in terms of its depictions of the cards, but it's done in such a thoughtful way that makes so much sense that I love reading with this deck. And I just love the sort of fresh air kind of feeling that you get from it. Like, it does feel spacious. It feels, you know, expansive, and it just is such a great deck to work with. So I really adore this one. I mean, it's just like, it's so beautiful. This High Priestess is so freaking amazing. Like, it's so beautiful. Anyway, so I really love this deck, and it just, as far as like a nature-based deck goes, that isn't specifically animal-based or anything like that, but it's nature-based. I really love that about this deck, and it just kind of really fits well into a niche in my collection for a deck that is very much focused on the natural world, but you know, in a very expansive sort of way. So it's really lovely. I just adore this one. And some of the cards as well, with their takes on different perspectives. Like, I love this star card, like this Hanged One card. This is one of my favorite Hanged Man cards. There are so many amazing, smart, interesting takes on the imagery in this deck, and I absolutely love it. So next up on my list is the Lonely Dreamer Tarot. This is the 2nd edition of the deck. I actually also own the 1st edition of the deck. I love them both. I just so happen to have the 2nd edition out right now is the one that I'm using, but I genuinely love them both. And I even backed on Kickstarter the 3rd edition of the deck because, you know, I'm a crazy person and I love this deck so much that I can't help but have every version of it. But anyway, this is a deck that is based on the artwork of Odilon Redon, and I love how it came out. Some of the artworks have been collaged together in certain ways to kind of create the image on the card, and the suit symbols have been photoshopped in certain cases, but I really love the art style. I love the sort of slightly surreal, slightly melancholy feeling of a lot of this artwork, and the depictions of each of the cards just came out so beautifully. And so this is just a deck that I really love reaching for, just because I love the art style so much. And it feels very meaningful. You know, the messages that you get from this artwork really convey the message of the card in a really, you know, very kind of potent way. So I just love this one. This is one that I was a little surprised ended up on this list. Like, I wasn't anticipating that, but the more I thought about it, I was like, yeah, definitely. I love reaching for this deck. Like, it just is one of those ones that I would be really sad if I didn't have it. So again, this is the Lonely Dreamer Tarot. So the final deck on this list is my ever beloved Pagan Otherworlds. I've had this deck for quite a while at this point. I think this is like the second edition of this deck, and I think they're now like on the 6th edition of it or something like that. So it's been around for a while, and Uzi has been continuously reprinting this one for a while, but this deck is just really special to me. It's another one of the decks, I guess, with a really strong sense of place, I feel like, which again, this is just sort of proving, I guess, how important that quality is to me in a deck. But I really love this one. I love the somewhat minimal nature of the minors. I love how all of the people portrayed in the deck genuinely feel like they're from a different world than our world. You know, they genuinely have a feeling of, you know, not being part of the world that we're used to. And they all feel like they just have something to tell you, you know? It's just an amazing, amazing deck. The way that the artwork is done, these oil paintings, it's so beautiful. It's on probably the best quality cardstock like you can find out there. So it's a joy to work with, and it's just really interesting and unique, and it feels like you're traveling in a different world when you're using this one, and that just makes it really special to me. Like, I love the feeling that I get when I work with this deck. It's really wonderful, and yeah, I would be so sad if this one wasn't in my life. I love this one. So that was my list of only 10 indie decks. Thanks for hanging out with me while we went through these. And again, I mean, this is just for today. Like, tomorrow this list could change. Obviously, there are so many wonderful indie decks out there. And there are other ones in my collection that were just really, really hard for me to not include. But like I said, this is it for today. So anyway, thanks again for joining me. One quick plug: if you have liked the looks of my pretty little spread cloth here with fireflies on it that was behind all of the decks that I was showing, this is something that is available in my shop. I do have a shop where I make lots of bags and cloths and other pretty things. It is Sunset Bow Boutique on Etsy. I will put a link to that in the description box down below. There's also a link to my online store where I sell readings. So if you are interested in booking a reading with me, that is also available down below. And thanks so much again, everybody, for spending this time with me. Have a great one. Bye-bye.